everyone, and welcome to this podcast where we dive into the transformative power of artificial intelligence in the scholarly world. I'm your host, Apurva Nagvenkar, and I'm working as Director of Data Science at Trinka AI. This is my first podcast where I'm basically hosting it. So please bear with me if I make any mistakes. So today we are exploring how AI is reshaping scholarly communication, the integrity of academic work, and the future of publishing. With us, we have Avi Staiman, a distinguished expert in AI technologies and their applications in academia. So he's the founder and CEO of Academic Language Experts, which is author services company dedicated to leveling the research playing field for ESL scholars. He's also co-founder of SciWriter.ai, which is the first co-pilot that helps researchers with their writing with responsible AI. Avi, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Apurva. And I have to say, I remember my first time that I was podcasting and hosting, and I was nervous, and I made all sorts of mistakes. So,
Okay.
good luck to you. I hope that
Yeah.
it goes really well. And even if there's always what to learn and improve, even if you've done 100 of these.
Yeah.
So it's
Thanks a lot,
exciting.
Avi. Yeah, thanks a lot. So I hope I don't make many mistakes.
You're
Uh,
you're off to a good start, so no worries.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So let's start with our first segment that is on technical intricacies of AI algorithms in scholarly communication. So Avi, could you share with us the primary AI technologies currently in use with scholarly communication?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a really interesting question, and I want to preface by saying that I'm not like a technical expert in the sense that I'm not a computer scientist. So I'm not going to dive into the deep details or under the hood exactly what's going on. But the way I see it, there are a number of different kind of areas where AI, I would say, is already kind of disrupting or interrupting how it is that we do research or how it is that we approach research. And then there's a whole nother category of higher education and learning with students, which is there's all sorts of tools there. So I don't want to touch on the learning and students. We'll leave that for another time maybe. But if we're thinking about research, so first of all, I like to think about the what I call generic AI tools, the general AI tools, which under those tools I include ChatGPT, which I assume everyone's familiar with, Midjourney for images, Jasper for marketing writing. These are tools that are created for the masses. They're created for all sorts of different people in different places, and can really be used by a big swath of people. On the other side, now the problem with those tools is they're great in many ways, but they also come with their own set of issues. So probably you've heard of hallucinations or misinformation that some of these tools can provide. Or you may have heard of situations where it makes up references that don't exist. And all these things tend to frustrate researchers. For researchers really put a prime value on the truth and on fact, and we get really upset when we see these kinds of issues coming up. So what's happened is actually there's been this kind of, I would call it a subgroup of AI companies and startups that have been developed to help researchers work through the research process. So that could be a literature review and asking questions to large language models that are built on the scientific literature. That can be help with writing and editing tools. That can be help with research dissemination. And these are all, most of these companies are either companies that were founded by researchers or research professionals who are really trying to address the specific issues that researchers have. So I'm excited about AI in general, but I'd like to say that I'm specifically excited about the AI for research tools because I think it can really make a difference in how we work.
I see. So can you name some of the tools which are available for scholarly researchers for them to use it, or like some of the applications, like, or the challenges like hallucination, reference management can be solved using this, like AI technology?
Yeah, so if we go through like the thought process of or like the process of writing an article, or even just doing our research, I think we can go through the entire lifeline of that process and think about, okay, what tools are available in order to help us at that specific point. So when I'm first starting out and I want to come up with research questions, there's a brand new tool called Research Kick, which was just put out a few weeks ago, that can help us like brainstorm research questions and try to come up with what's new and what would fill a gap, which I think is really cool. Then if we move on to kind of research, literature reviews, or trying to understand that, which is a big problem because as the literature grows, it's hard to kind of stay on top of everything that's happening. So in that context, you've got consensus, you've got Perplexity AI. One that I specifically like is SciSpace. So SciSpace is a really cool tool where you can kind of go in, you can ask the literature questions and get answers and actually chat with the literature via the chatbot. You can get you can get really smart summaries. So let's say I just want to know the methodology in the following 5 articles, I can do that. Or if I just want to know the results, or I just want to see, who was involved, or maybe I want to find the people that were involved in that article, it's very intelligent searching. So it's not just keyword and now I get a result and I have to go through all these results and most of them are not relevant. It's actually very relevant results to your study. I can track it in SciSpace, for example. I can sort it by what is the most recent literature, right? So I can see what's just been produced. So that's really cool in terms of like, the research and literature search. If we're moving down the line, I would say, their GPT can be used for data analysis, which is a cool use case. And then there's the writing and editing thing. So, when it comes to writing, so I'm working on a tool now called SciWriter AI that you mentioned at the outset, which I'm very excited about, which is a structured writing process, especially for early career researchers, as well as researchers for whom English is a second language. We just produced the prototype this week, and we're iterating on it now, and we're actually looking for researchers who are interested in getting involved in an early point in testing, so that we can really make the whole writing process a lot easier, take a lot less time, and write in really great English from the outset. And then there are good editing tools out there. I know Trinka is close to your heart,
Yeah.
Apurva, right? With
Yes.
editing texts that are already created, that already exist. There are other companies out there that are doing similar things,
Mhm.
which I think are still important, especially when you take into the fact that the general tools, again, like ChatGPT or like Grammarly, they generally are not trained on the scientific literature. So I think we're understanding through the AIs is the more that the source of the information is reliable and trustworthy, the better the output in general, the better the output is going to be. And that's why, science-based, I'm always a fan of science-based, research.
I see. That's very insightful. Building on that, like there are many companies who use ChatGPT directly in their product, right? Do you see that like it's a challenge for end users to use it directly because many of the time when you use ChatGPT directly or Gemini in that case, they are not fine-tuned on like academic data or like research data. So, do they give good results, or like after using it, people feel that I should have tried something else, or like this model is not doing right because it's not trained on scholarly articles.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I mean, I think we need to remember what ChatGPT is and what it isn't, and that helps to frame the conversation. So, first of all, what I would say is people oftentimes think that ChatGPT is kind of like Wikipedia, but personalized for them, right? It's like a Wikipedia they can ask questions to. Well, that's not really how it's built. It's built as a large language model. It's not a large information model. So I actually think that GPT's best use cases are around language, are around crafting language, editing text, translating text, summarizing text, crunching and getting and processing the information within text. When you're asking for answers to specific questions, then all of a sudden, I'm not sure GPT, is always the best solution, especially as it's not, actively live connected to the internet. So there are other tools, that either are extensions of GPT or work independently. So Scholar AI is one that comes to mind, where I can actually, or Perplexity, where I can actually ask a research question and get a research answer that's based on the scientific literature. Now, it's not the entire scientific literature because a lot of the scientific literature is still, blocked behind paywalls, which is a problem. And it's hard to access that because publishers don't usually, give away that information very easily. But that being said, I don't know. I'm just thinking about if we wanted to build, for example, a use case for doctors to get real answers to medical questions on the spot when they're treating a patient. I don't think we would want to use an LLM that was trained on Reddit, right? Or that was trained on, BuzzFeed. We want an LLM that was trained on the scientific literature. So I think that's, I even think that the scientific publishing, scholarly publishing, doesn't even realize the value of its own content. Or, maybe we do, but we haven't figured out how to monetize it yet, or how to turn it into a product that can be really beneficial. So once you realize and understand that, well, in real use cases, we're going to want to build off the scientific literature, and this is our industry, this is our business. We need to figure out how we can level up to actually, bring that literature to, to the use cases where it can really be beneficial. So, it's this funny dance, because on the one hand, publishers tend to not like, OpenAI and Claude and, Anthropic, who made Claude, and because they ingested their content arguably without permission. But on the other hand, I think the only way forward is to combine the technology of, these big tech companies with the publisher's content, and to really get results that we're happy with.
That's very insightful, and incredibly enlightening too. So like, I mean, let's try to move, like, from abstract concepts to concrete examples. Uh, so like, and like, can you let's focus on some of the anecdotes. So I'm particularly excited about this part, and I also guess like our viewers too are pretty excited about it. Could you share with us some specific instances where machine learning models or NLP techniques that have produced significantly results in academic research or scholarly communication? What you have experienced about it, like, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of really interesting work that's done in chemistry, actually, with predicting certain chemical compounds that would be, you have to run so many, so many scripts, to do that manually would be impossible, but to come up with formulas for drug production, I think has been a really valuable use case. I don't know as much about that, but that sounds like a really interesting, kind of application. What I do understand a little bit more about is, there were two researchers from the Technion Institute in Israel who came up with this data to paper in an hour, and this was actually published in Nature, where they took a data set from the CDC, if I'm not mistaken, and they ran it through GPT. Now, they were computer scientists, so they knew how to manipulate the algorithms, but they ran it through GPT. Were able to actually produce a legitimate study in an hour on, I believe it was the health effects of vegetable consumption amongst diabetes, people with diabetes. And it was just crunching data, really, right? But they knew how to take that, manipulate it and turn it into a scientific paper in a way that was, really compelling. So I think, that's just one example. I'm not saying that everyone should be writing their papers in an hour. And of course, we run the risk when we allow these, when we enable these tools, that they can be used for bad as well as for good. So we need to keep an eye on that. But I think, like, that's just an example where, anyone who is listening to this, who's had frustrations writing a paper before, and just, is like, breaking their teeth, maybe because English isn't your native language, or maybe because you're not used to writing in this scientific formula. I mean, that's what I'm trying to build at SciWriter, to solve this problem. But I think to be able to actually bring that to fruition, to write the paper in an hour, I think is everybody's dream. And while we might not get there tomorrow, I think it is an attainable goal if we chip away at it, slowly but surely.
I see. That's very insightful. So just to update here, we at Trinka AI, we are also working on some cool stuff like RLHF. So to give you an overview, like, we have our own in-house grammar error correction engine, which has really good accuracy, and it does advanced grammar error correction. But sometimes some of our clients need specific changes tailored to their domain, or like, for them. So then for them, like, showing all changes may be like, irritating feeling. So we incorporate RLHF on our in-house grammar error correction model, using some sort of preferential data which was provided by the client. And we saw that, after implementing RLHF, it moved towards the client need. And we also observed that, like, with more preferential data, it was moving closer to client need. So now RLHF, just to to simplify this, like, it's a reinforcement learning technique, which was on which the ChatGPT model was built on, and like it was introduced in 2017 by OpenAI, but after ChatGPT it became pretty huge, and we thought of integrating it in our application, and we also got really good results with that. So that was a pretty exciting part from our end as well.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've done some testing and
Mhm.
I I did say before that I do believe in general in the power of the science specific models. Specifically when it comes to language, I'm not yet sure because I have been testing GPT and I have been testing, and I've tested Trinka and other tools in the industry. And I think on the one hand, yes, there's maybe I think it Trinka is, or not Trinka, but just all these tools, right, that are out there. They are good in the sense that they're a little bit more careful and they know scientific language,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily have the data set, I think, that some of the bigger large language models do. So there's a trade-off there, right? And it's like, well, what's more powerful? Is it the more specific, scientific terminology, or is it the ability to really reconstruct sentences that need a lot of help? So I think it depends on who you are and what stage you're at and how much work you need. So for those researchers who just need like a kind of a lighter touch, but really to make sure that it's, polished. I think that the tools that we've built in our industry are really powerful and helpful. But if you're, really trying to improve, like, get your hands dirty, there I've actually seen, GPT be pretty impressive, sometimes even
Yeah.
better than some of the specialized tools.
True. Like, just to add here, there are lots of open sourced models which are there right now. And there are like models like Llama 2, then there's Mistral, there's the T5 family models. So they are trained on very lot of data, right? I mean, and when you fine tune them using some small section of data of particular academic domain, then, it starts giving really good results. And we also observe the same thing. If we train model from scratch, then it might not give you very good precision or recall, but the accuracy might not be that great. But like when you use this open source model, then it gives, right, really good results.
Yeah.
uh, when I talk about this, when I take like very minimal amount of data in hand, like that's what, clients have. Most of the clients don't have like massive amount of data. They just have like minimal amount of data, like 1,000 data
Right.
points or like 10,000 data.
Also, don't forget that there's the level of repetition when it comes to academic text. I mean, it's not that maybe certain phrases are repeated over and over, but the whole idea of academia is you're supposed to be always coming up with something new and novel, and there's so many subfields and niches that it's kind of sometimes it's hard to really, kind of really fully capture everything that's going on in research. So, just because something is trained on research, a researcher in literature is going to want something very different from a researcher in sociology, is going to want something very different from a researcher in biomedicine, right? So, it's almost a never-ending, right, niche, that you can get into, and I think it's still early days, and we'll have to see over time what the best, what really produces the best. And when I say best, it's also a very subjective question. I don't think one thing I've learned from being, running academic language experts over the last 10 years and being actively involved in the author services industry is that, you know, within the range of good editing, there are different styles, right? And a lot of it is stylistic, right? So you have people who really take a heavy hand and really make the text better. And some authors like that, and some authors don't like that. Some authors like maintaining their own voice better. So there's not like there's objective gold standard of here's what a good paper looks like, right? A good paper can look like a lot of different things. So we want to make sure, I think, that we balance between giving these, a level playing field for researchers for whom English is not their first language, but on the other hand, not overdoing it and taking away their personal voice, as well. So that's a balance.
I see. Can you throw some light on literature reviews? How this AI tools are helping in literature review, especially in searching documents, answering queries, summarizing the entire document.
Yeah, I mean, right now, the typical way that a researcher goes about a literature review, they may search PubMed, they may go onto Google Scholar and search there, and then they start going through each and every, entry, and they're usually based on keywords. So if the keywords are generic, then you may get a lot of stuff that's not related. If the keywords are too specific, you might not get any answers. So it's really it's funny because, we always thought of Google and Google Scholar as like, kind of the pinnacle of advancement. And now all of a sudden Google seems like it's kind of outdated, at least in this specific context, right? It's obviously still very good for many other things. But what tools like SciSpace and Elicit is another really good one that I recommend. What they can really do is like you said, first of all, is you have this tremendous corpus of information. So if you just search for keywords, you're going to get all sorts of stuff. But if you ask specific questions, these tools know how to say, okay, I get what you're trying. I get a little bit more about what you're aiming, what your end goal is, or your research question is. Now I can direct you more specifically to studies that have addressed this specific issue. And it's just a much more sophisticated semantic search than it is, just a traditional keyword search. And what that and then so that's kind of part one to it. And then part two is what I mentioned before about the user experience and kind of the interface is, instead of me going one at a time and looking through and finding out, I actually have this dynamic summary that I get, where I see the summary of, I may get a summary. I can get a layman summary. Let's say I'm not a researcher in the field, or I study a different field, or I don't know, I have a relative who's sick, God forbid, and I want to understand what the potential treatment plans are. I can go in and get a scientific summary, a layman summary. I can ask for, specific methods, and I can almost converse. I want to be careful not to make it too human, but I can converse and engage in a dialogue with an article, not just with a chatbot, but with an article, and ask questions, and I'm trying to understand better. Now, I want to give a word of caution. That can hallucinate as well. There's no, even if you have a model that's trained 100% on the scientific literature, that doesn't mean that every answer and every chat that I get is going to be accurate. I think these are bigger challenges that we're trying to tackle. But for me, the number one benefit is when we have these, if let's say as a researcher, there are, I don't know, 300 articles in your field, and there's no way for you to read all of them. All of a sudden, there's this way of shrinking that down to 100. And then out of those 100, maybe I go through the summaries and I pick out 20 that I want to dig into further. And then I go and I read those articles. I'm not suggesting that we don't need to read articles anymore. The opposite. I'm suggesting that let's take the time to read the articles that are really most important to us and hyper focus our attention on that, as opposed to reading through a lot of articles where by the time we get to the end of the article, we're like, all right, that wasn't relevant. Next article, right? Which I think everybody has spent a lot of time doing that.
Yeah, that's nice. So I will also like to add that we have our own product called as Anagorate, which helps users to effectively do their literature review by skimming through related papers. And we also have a mechanism that extracts the key insights from the paper, performs summarization on that. And we also have something like Copilot engine in place where researchers can ask questions to it, and and it gives answers accordingly. So we use here technique like REG concept, where the co-pilot give so that the co-pilot gives correct and accurate results by minimizing the hallucination. So I think the most of the tools which hallucinates, I think by applying REG on that, it tries to minimize it. I won't say it removes the hallucination completely, but the ratio of the hallucination decreases drastically. So yeah.
And that's just a sign of how fast this industry is moving, because I didn't even know, right? And I'm really excited to hear that you've been working on this. Because maybe, there's just so many tools out there that it's hard to keep up with all of them and make sure that we're on top of everything. So thank you for bringing that to my attention, and I'll be sure to check that out as soon as
Yeah,
we're.
sure. I think you should check that out. Yeah. I'm particularly interested in knowing about the AI ethics part here, and I think you are primarily working on in this field. So can you throw some light on it? Like what is AI ethics? In so that it is understood to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it's not necessarily my main field, but it's something that I think anyone who is building a tool in the AI space needs to take seriously and consider. I would say, AI ethics is a very, kind of broad question. It starts with, how is the content ingested, right? Was it with permission? Was it without permission? And then how is the content, what's the outputs that we're getting? Is it biased? Is it hallucinating? Is it, there's all sorts of issues, but let's focus specifically on AI research ethics, okay? Because I think that's that's where I can maybe add a little bit more. And I think in the research context, we've had for many years, we've had issues that have, arisen with paper mills and with, just fraudulent research. And I think that AI tools are both the problem and the cure. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is on the one hand, AI tools can really be used to detect fraudulent research that never was able to be detected before. So for example, one really great example of this is image detection, right? So there are a few companies out there. There's Proofig, Image Twin. They're doing really great work in being able to automatically scan research articles and determine whether there's duplicate images or there's fraudulent images, or and that's really important. And I think everyone was surprised by how frequent this issue is. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the researchers are doing something intentionally bad. Sometimes it's just a mistake of which image they put in, but it's quite frequent. So we need to address it and think about it. And that's a really great example of how AI can help solve a problem which always existed. And now all of a sudden we're making the research literature better because of it. On the flip side, if we're thinking about the issues, well, all of a sudden, there have been a number of stories recently where, studies have been published with the, lines directly from GPT, right? It's very clear that GPT wrote this article or, wrote big parts of it. Or you have situations where AR artificial intelligence images are showing up in research papers. Now, if those images are actually accurate portrayals of the science, I have no problem with them. But as soon as they, are something more than that, then all of a sudden we have issues.
Okay, that's solid foundation of for understanding AI ethics. What about data privacy in scholarly communication? How we can ensure that, like, I mean, while using this tools like ChatGPT or like other models.
Yeah, that's a really important question, specifically because there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think that people, people oftentimes look at it as a binary. Either it's safe to use GPT or it's not safe to use GPT. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. What I mean by that is, first of all, we need to be aware of what data we're handing over to these tech companies when we're using their platforms, right? So, for example, at GPT, if you use the free version, they reserve the right, and I think makes sense that they do, to use the inputs that you have given them to learn and to train the next round of their algorithms. Now, they may well turn around. I don't think that means that all of a sudden your texts are going to start showing up elsewhere on the internet. That's a common myth that I hear from researchers. Well, if I give them my text, and all of a sudden someone else is going to be able to find it. I don't think so. But you are giving OpenAI permissions to use that for training their own models for all sorts of other things, which you may or may not be comfortable with. On the other hand, if you connect to ChatGPT via the API and via the paid service, then all of a sudden they have, at least in their commitment and their terms and conditions, they're not going to be learning from those texts, and in theory, it's entirely private. So that's a really important question before you start using any tools. Is kind of, where is my data going? How is it being used? These are legitimate questions. Most companies have policies up on their website, to kind of declare that. Again, I haven't yet seen scenarios where a researcher says, "Oh my God, I put up my data set into this tool, and then all of a sudden I found it somewhere else online." A week later, and kind of lose that privacy. That being said, that doesn't mean it can't happen. It doesn't mean it's not happening in maybe in the dark web or in other places. So I think it's important to kind of check out the background of who's building these tools, right? Have they gotten approbations from kind of reputable sources? Are the people who have built things in the past, the people that are involved in the scholarly publishing industry, or are these kind of maybe shadier players? Because in any market, right, and if there's an opportunity to manipulate, someone will take that up. But that doesn't automatically mean that everyone who's doing this kind of thing is going to all of a sudden be starting to share your privacy. So I wouldn't, I think that a balanced approach is right, whereby you're careful, you check, but it doesn't, you don't need to not use any of these tools because someone might or something might. I mean, we even know, even when you're submitting your article to a journal, right, you've got the reviewers who are seeing it, the editorial staff. At a certain point, we have to expose ourselves and we have to kind of share, right? Or if we share with a colleague who's going to give us feedback, or, so anyway, I think there's what to be said for, kind of thinking about, what is reasonable and rational when it comes to these questions.
That's nice. So Avi, for the researchers who are basically listening to our talk, are very eager, like, to integrate AI into their workflows. So could you shed some light on, like, from where they should begin, or like, how do they can scale from novice to expert level? Like, What should be their foundation whenever they want to integrate AI into their
Yeah,
life?
so it's funny you asked that because I asked myself the same question about 6 months ago. I started joining WhatsApp groups and started, kind of like engaging with other researchers. And it was a little bit, it felt a little bit like Wild West, right? Where it was like everyone was kind of, just learning in a different way, and it was chaos. And it was, so I actually put together a course, a free course online called AI Tool Up Tuesdays. And the goal for this course was actually to help researchers get some organization and clarification around the different tools. And I actually invited the entrepreneurs who built the tools to come and present their tools as part of the course. So I know that's shameless self-promotion, but I do think it's a free course, so I'm not making anything off of this. But it's an opportunity for everyone to go in, and you can and what I would suggest doing is looking at the subjects. So I tried to organize them thematically, and so that if you want to learn about how to do literature search with AI, you can do that. You want to learn about writing and editing with AI, you can do that, or image detection, or anything else. So that's kind of the first step. And the second tip I would give is don't try to build a whole new workflow, with 10 different tools, tomorrow. I think it's enough, study, see what's out there. Similar to what we said about the literature review, start with 10 tools, think about which ones you want to learn about, see which ones are really going to be most impactful on your research. Start working with 2, 3 tools maximum. Maybe one day there'll be one big tool to rule them all, but for now it's very siloed into different subject areas and different tools. So, start practicing. Don't be afraid. Don't give up if you come across, something that you think is a hallucination or isn't, didn't give you the answer you wanted. Continue practicing. I like to compare it. I always say, pretend like you're engaging with an intern on their first day of work who has infinite potential for knowledge, right? They're a genius, but right now they don't know anything, right? So we need to teach them everything. We need to engage with them. We need to be very clear about how we prompt, how we give them instructions. I think that's if you pretend like you have to describe it in the same way you would describe a new concept to a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or an intern. I think that helps us to kind of get a better picture of what it is that we're doing. I also have been doing more recently boot camps for academic universities, where actually I come in either via Zoom or in person, where I actually teach the researchers how to use these tools, and we do hands-on 1 or 2 day kind of deep dives into these tools. So that's another way just for me to be able to teach, because I think it's really important, it's really valuable, but there isn't necessarily, because it's happened so fast, there isn't necessarily, a structured, organized course, and that's what I've been trying to fill that gap.
See, that's pretty great. So I'll definitely try out your course. Is it on YouTube or like I didn't get?
No, what you need to do is it's actually on the SciWriter website.
Oh,
So it's and we can maybe share this in the show notes, but
yeah, sure.
SciWriter AI / AI hyphen tools hyphen research sorry hyphen for hyphen research. So that's SciWriter.ai / AI hyphen tools hyphen for hyphen research. Or just do a Google search for SciWriter AI Tool Up Tuesdays, and it'll come up, and you just need to and then you'll see the whole course, and you can access it, on demand whenever you want.
That's great. I'll try that out definitely, and we'll also share this link on our page for
Perfect.
the podcast. Uh, yeah, I mean, coming to the last question, like what do you think? Where are we going ahead? What's the future in scholarly communication when we talk about generative AI, LLMs? What do you think about it?
Yeah. So I think first of all, there's going to be a legal question that's asked about, kind of what are the AI, LLMs able to ingest and whatnot? What are the licensing agreements around that look like? But then I also think there's a question of how authors are going to use it. How do we protect research integrity? How do we increase research integrity with AI tools? And what does it mean, and at what point do we start trusting AI for certain parts of the authoring process or certain parts of the data processing process better than humans? And that's, I think, a really scary question, but maybe an important question to ask, right? At what point do we have papers communicating with other papers, right? And how do we structure the metadata in a way that is feasible? And I think these are exciting questions for researchers, but also scary at the same time. So, my approach is always, the best way to get over any fear is to actually engage and actually start learning. And I think that's where we're at the learning stage now, right? And when you learn and when researchers learn about these tools, so then I think they'll be able to really kind of understand where it works for them, where it doesn't work for them, and also understand that this is an evolving process, right? Where like, imagine everyone should think back to their first time using the internet, and it would come up slowly, on your screen, and you'd have to know the exact URL to plug in. And, I can imagine that back then, many people were probably like, the internet, not such a, not so helpful, or Wikipedia, right? I know in academia, we were very skeptical of Wikipedia. Wikipedia, no, that's no good. We can't use that. And now it's like, everyone uses Wikipedia, and we've actually realized it's a great, the crowdsourcing model can really be incredibly helpful. So anyway, point is that I think that's really kind of, let's continue experimenting, continue. It's an exciting time. Don't be worried about your jobs and all the fear mongering that's going on. Just start playing and experimenting. On the one hand, you'll see it has big faults, and on the other hand, you'll see it has big opportunities, and that's the way to use it best.
Yeah, that's very thoughtful. It's clear that we are on the brink of exciting developments. I think that will definitely shape the landscape of scholarly communications for years to come. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, and with that, we have. I think we should conclude now today's podcast. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Avi Staiman for sharing his expertise and insight with us. Your contributions have truly enriched our understanding of AI and academic research. Thanks, Avi. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Prava. I appreciate the invite, and I look forward to continuing our chat when we know more about AI.
Yeah, sure, definitely.